edition of Tuesday Out to Lunch. That makes any sense. This is part 8 of the continuing history of jazz drums with Mel Lewis, and we're awaiting Mel's arrival. And today we'll be delving into Elvin Jones and Louie Bellson as we continue with this series on jazz's greatest drummers. Let's begin with something from a Thad and Mel record, Thad Jones and Mel Lewis. The album is called Potpourri, and it was done in, 1974. And we will hear Blues in a Minute, which is an original by Thad Jones. And I'm trying to see who solos on this. Here we go. Quentin Butter Jackson. George Mraz is on the bass, Roland Hanna on electric piano. And then Quentin Butter Jackson, one of the great Ellingtonians, is heard on trombone. And Jerry Dodgen is heard on soprano. And Thad Jones on cornet. Ron Bridgewater on tenor. Cecil Bridgewater on trumpet. And that's pretty much all the solos. But the big thing is the great band, Thad Jones and Mel Lewis Orchestra. Again, Blues in a Minute. right, and that was Blues in a Minute by Thad Jones Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra from the album Potpourri on the Philadelphia International Records label, which I guess was a subsidiary of CBS. We're involved with CBS in some way because it's copyrighted by Columbia. And we heard from Cecil Bridgewater, Ron Bridgewater, Quentin Butter Jackson, Roland Hanna, the whole great band. In fact, the personnel, Thad Jones, Jerry Dodgen on first alto, Ed Hickes on second alto, the tenors of Ron Bridgewater and Billy Harper, and Pepper Adams on the baritone, the trumpets of John Faddis on first trumpet, and let's see, Cecil Bridgewater on trumpet, Jim Bossy on trumpet, and Thad, of course. Trombones, Jimmy Nepper, Cliff Heather, Billy Campbell, Quentin Butter Jackson, George Mraz on the bass, Mel Lewis on the drums, Roland Hanna on the piano. And I hope I haven't left anyone out, but the way they got it organized here, it's kind of hard to give the complete personnel. Steve Furtado also on trumpet. Well, this is part 8 of the History of Jazz Drums with Mel Lewis, and Mel is on the way and will be here very shortly. And then we'll jump into Louis Bellson and Elvin Jones today. I can't wait till he gets here. So why don't we hear one more from this album? This is one of the many, many classic big band albums that have been put down by Mel Lewis. This is when Thad was still with the band. We'll hear a beautiful All My Yesterdays. This album was recorded in 1974. And this is really beautiful. Jerry Dodgen is heard on alto here. Billy Harper on tenor. Roland Hanna on piano are the soloists. Okay, we just heard two more from the, pardon me, these. We just heard another one from the Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Jazz Orchestra. We heard Quiet Lady, and before that we heard All My Yesterdays. That was a beautiful feature for Jerry Dodgen on All My Yesterdays also.
And what'd you play before that?
Before that, we heard the first track was Blues in a Minute.
Oh, yeah. That's what that guy who called as I was walking in. He said, I missed breaks. I didn't miss any breaks, man. You don't know the arrangement. You don't even know what's going on, so don't say I missed breaks. I don't miss breaks.
Yeah.
Don't forget that was my band, too.
Yeah, we had
And now it's my band.
kind of a silly
But,
phone
I mean,
call.
it's a silly thing, but Thad conducted those breaks. He made them up right then and there. And the ones, if we sounded like we missed them, it's because he missed them. So, I mean, don't take it on yourself that you know what you're talking about because you don't know the arrangement. That arrangement was new on that date, and that's the way it came off. We put it together, and that's the way it went off, and it came off fine, and it was swinging, and that's something I don't know if you know about.
Yeah. That's a beautiful record.
But I mean,
I'm
don't
glad
like
you had
that,
the chance to.
telling me that what I did when you don't know what the situation was even. You know.
Yeah.
My God.
Yeah, well, that's one of the great things about being able to have someone like Mel Lewis or any great artist up here at the station is that we can find out from pardon the metaphor, from the horse's mouth
Of
exactly
course, I mean, nobody's got a right to imply that they know what happened. They weren't there. You know, they have no idea. You think if we made mistakes, you think we'd release that take? We would have done it over.
Yeah.
That was the final take. That's the one we liked.
Yeah. And it's a beautiful record.
It is.
The record is called Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, Potpourri.
And we play a lot of that music to this day. You know,
yeah.
I mean, it's from that album. That's some of the nicest things.
Ambience.
I only wish that some of those Stevie Wonder things that he wrote for that album, the scores were lost. You know, as were the parts. The parts were copied on some horrible kind of paper that just didn't last long, and then there was no scores. And we don't know what happened to him. And Thad didn't know what happened to him at the time because we think the copyist, just never turned him back to him.
Talking about Don't You Worry About a Thing and Living for the City.
Those things.
Or maybe have Mark Lotman transcribe them or someone.
Well, it'd be nice.
Yeah, someone can transcribe them someday. But in any case, now, what is this record? It says you told me the story once, and I'm sorry, I don't remember. Philadelphia International Records, but yet it says copyright by CBS.
It's Philadelphia International was a...
Subsidiary?
It was not a subsidiary. It was they released through Columbia, and they were basically a very hot label in those years. They had the Blue Notes, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, and VSOP, the orchestra there from down at the Sound of Philadelphia, and they were really swinging. But they got in some trouble because they were involved in payola. And the government went after them and wiped them out, which was a drag because they were nice people. Gamble and Huff was the original people who owned it, and that was that. And then Columbia dropped them, you know.
Did that take this record out of distribution, pretty much?
Pretty much, yeah. Unless CBS feels they could put it out again if they wanted to. In fact, I heard there was supposed to be I never heard of it. There was supposed to have been a best of Stevie Wonder. Albums put out with different artists
playing Stevie
Wonder things, and I think those couple of tunes of ours were supposed to be on that album.
Yeah. Well, it's 12:32, and we're going to get down to business now. And the business that we're going to get down to is the 8th part of a continuing series of shows with Mel Lewis on the history of jazz drums. And just a brief introduction to say that we did shows on the history of jazz drums with Mel. I should say Mel did them back in 1982 or so. And what happened was so many drummers liked the show, and we lent out tapes and everything that lost track of some of the tapes. And as years went by, I kept getting more requests to rebroadcast the show. So when I mentioned it to Mel, he said, well, instead of rebroadcasting them, why don't we just do them again? So for the last half year or so or more, we've been, more than half a year, much more, we've been redoing the history of jazz drums, and who better to give us the history of jazz drums than one of the greatest jazz drummers ever, Mel Lewis. I mean, it's a perfect thing. And already, I know every time we're together, someone's always coming up and asking for the tapes, and if anyone out there has any ideas, actually, in terms of marketing these things, let us know, because it might be a good idea.
It would be nice, because it would be nice for... a lot of young drummers who never got to hear of these
Yeah.
people, live. And don't forget, most of the stuff we're using is live material.
Yeah.
So it would be good lessons for them, because
Yeah.
that's how you learn.
We've done Big Sid Catlett and Sonny Greer and Papa Joe Jones and Baby Dodds and Sudie Singleton and Gene Krupa and Max Roach and Shelly Manne and Shadow Wilson and Tiny Khan and Davy Tuff and many others. And we did Roy Haynes
Right.
and Shadow Wilson. And today we're going to deal with two drummers who are not that far apart in age, maybe 5 or 10 years, Elvin and Louis Bellson.
Yeah.
Louis is probably about late 60s now. He must be.
Well, he's over 65.
Yeah, yeah. And
Well,
Elvin
Elvin is let's see, Elvin's about 63.
is Elvin 63?
Oh yeah, he's
Elvin is older than you?
Oh yes, he is. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
he's 2 or 3 years older than I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are two drummers who were pretty much contemporaries, but who came on the scene at different times and certainly have totally different careers. But the thing that they have in common is they both are great drummers, and certainly Elvin Jones, one of the great innovators of jazz
Sure.
drums, and Louis Bellson, one of the great drummers of all time,
Yeah.
one of the great men. So let's kick it off with Louis Bellson and give you a little sketch of the early years of Louis' career before he became a leader on his own. We'll begin with a couple of tracks with Benny Goodman from 1946, and let's hear them right now. We'll hear the Benny Goodman Sextet with I'll Always Be in Love with You, with Johnny White on the vibes, Joe Bushkin piano, Barney Kessel guitar, Harry Babison, is that how you say it, or Babasson?
No, Babison.
Babison on the bass. Babison on the bass.
Yeah.
Make a nice record. And Louis Bellson on the drums. This is recorded in Hollywood, 1946. We're focusing on Louis Bellson.
funny little thing, but I never knew I could ever feel the way that I do till I looked into your sweet eyes of blue, oh baby. I never had a thrill till I held your hand. Don't know what it is, but I understand that it's something new, it's different, it's grand, oh baby. Now, when you kiss, I know I miss a beat or two in my heart. I don't mind. There's nothing more to live for. What if I should die and travel where I would have to find the heavenly best? Wouldn't it be hell if you weren't there? Oh, baby.
All right, we just heard two early examples of Louis Bellson in 1946 with the Benny Goodman. First with the sextet, we heard I'll Always Be in Love with You, and then Mel Powell's arrangement of Oh Baby, which featured Lou McGarity on the trombone, Johnny Best on the trumpet, Gish Gilbertson on the tenor, Danny Bank was in that band, and Mel Powell on the piano, Benny Goodman on clarinet, and of course, Louis Bellson. So Mel, what do you have to say about these early examples?
Well, see, this is pre-double bass drum time. This is before he got into that. When I met Louis, I met him in around '48. He was with Tommy Dorsey's band, and he had just come up with this idea of having two bass drums, and Gretsch designed an outfit for him.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, that set, I mean, a lot of today's rock drummers, a lot of them don't realize that Louis Bellson was the originator of the two bass drum setup. Nobody else, Louis. And he had two large bass drums, and between the two bass drums was a long a big tom-tom set in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
And then he had, of course, a side tom-tom on the floor, and then he had, over on the left-hand bass drum, he had a small tom-tom. Then, of course, he had a snare drum behind that big tom-tom in the middle. So actually, he had a deep tom-tom right in the front of him, you know, which sort of filled the gap between the two bass drums, because the bass drums are facing, outward, not straight ahead.
Right.
And then of course, they had to create this hi-hat pedal, which hooked onto one of the bass drums, so it was a different kind of a pedal. And later on, he changed the setup. He got rid of that middle bass drum. But on this, I know he wasn't using it yet, because when I met him, he had just started.
Yeah.
And in fact, Dorsey had rigged up a revolving stand for his drums to be put on, so that he would go around in a circle, and people would be able to see what was going on behind there with the two bass drums and all that. And now that solo he just played on that was very well constructed. I mean, it had a beginning and an ending, you know, and the band came in just, you know, it was easy to follow. It wasn't as technically difficult as the things he plays today. He tries things a lot more today than he did in those days. Of course, he was pretty young then, and Louis had shortly, just before that, during the World's Fair time in New York here, he'd won the Slingerland Gene Krupa drum contest.
Look-alike drum yeah.
Well,
no,
it wasn't a look-alike. It was play, you know. I was in that same contest in Buffalo, but I was too young. I was actually disqualified, but I was allowed to compete. But I was told in front that that if I won, I couldn't win.
Right.
And I won in Buffalo, but I lost. You know.
You were about 10 years old.
I was 12.
12.
And you had to be 13. And they asked Krupa to make a decision on me, and he said, "Oh, let Red compete." He says, "But if he wins, we'll have to give him like a consolation prize because he can't. It's, you know, the rules are made. You had to be 13 to 18. Louis was about 18, and he was the national winner in New York here. And he got a job with Benny Goodman.
That's right. And that was actually in 1943. That's right. It was late 42, which would have made you just 12 years old.
The fair was in 41 and 42.
I think the World's Fair was 39.
No, 39 through 41.
Right.
It lasted.
Because he went with Goodman in mid-42, which would have been right after that.
Yeah.
And then he was out, and then this actually is during when he came back with Benny in 46. All right. We're talking with Mel Lewis about Louis Bellson. We're listening to some early Louis Bellson records. Let's move right ahead to, I guess, one of the very first huge highlights in Louis Bellson's career, and that's when in 1950-51, Johnny Hodges, Sonny Greer, and Louis Bellson and Lawrence Brown all left Duke Ellington's band. And, Sonny Greer had been such an integral part of the band that Duke decided when he had to replace him, no reason to try and get someone who plays like Sonny Greer.
No, there was nobody.
And he went in the other direction, and he got Louis Bellson. And Bellson distinguished himself not only as a drummer, but, believe it or not, as a composer and an arranger. I mean, imagine writing and composing something when you're in Duke Ellington's band. And Ellington thought enough of his work that he recorded a few of Louis' arrangements, which is quite a compliment. And one of the most famous ones is called The Hawk Talks. And we're going to hear another one that's a feature for Louis. This is called Skin Deep. Louis Bellson on the drums, recorded in December 1952. The Ellington band at this point featured Cat Anderson, Clark Terry, Willie Cook, and Ray Nance. Not a bad trumpet section. Juan Teasdale, Quentin Jackson, and Britt Woodman.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Gonsalves, Harry Carney, Hilton Jefferson, Russell